All right, good morning, folks. Thank you for coming. This is our second community forum where we're going to spend some time and pull back the sheet and show a little bit about a very important ministry here at the church. That, of course, is the worship ministry. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start off by hearing a few thoughts on the subject from our senior pastor. Then we'll have Heather Potter speak about the role of music in our worship. And then I'm excited about this too. We're going to have members of the worship ministry talk to us. We're going to begin with Beth Kuntz, who's the chair, talk about what all the work, because my conviction is, and I think you already know, and you'll certainly, I think, appreciate after this, it really does take a small community to make worship happen here at Covenant. So let's get started. Thank you, Bob, for joining us. Once again, we catch you when you are have other responsibilities here at this hour, and that you will be doing the sermon at our 9:30 service. But let's get started here. And of course, Bob will have to be leaving us pretty quickly at some point. Bob, let's start this way. I've often heard you talk about the centrality of worship in our church life. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think the centrality of worship has at least two dimensions that are worthwhile paying attention to in our church life. And one is on a personal level, that worship is essential to each of us individually, and then, of course, corporately. And when we think about church, I think it's easy to think about the centrality of worship corporately and as a body, as a congregation, as a people. That's one of our primary activities. But I also think on a personal level that that we're called to bring worship as a central dimension of our lives. And so we want to cultivate that within our spiritual practice. Let me give you an example of this morning when I first stepped outside. My first response was, "Oh, thank you." Right. And that's a spiritual response. That's a worshipful response. That the first response to the day or to an encounter is done in response to another and to my understanding of God and how I understand God. And so to ground my personal life, center it in worship, is something that we think is faithful to Christian discipleship. And so centrality of worship there, and then centrality of worship in our life as a congregation. So historically, why is Sunday school at 9:30? Historically in the South, anybody know why? Because it's the best time to come. Because it was an agrarian society and people worked in the fields first and worked on their farms first. And then they came to worship later after other things. And so we don't live in that society anymore. We live in a different society. Our main competition isn't the fields. Our main competition is, well, it is the fields. It's soccer fields. It really is. And so to design our programmatic life with worship being central and emphasizing that and pouring resources and effort and energy into it is theologically, as well as ecclesiology, the study of the church or the way the church runs, is faithful to our tradition. So have some coherence and consistency between how we format the life of the church and the way we think about the Christian faith.
Yeah.
So that's some of what we think about the centrality of worship. I've often said that there's really only two numbers that matter in the church, and that is the number of children in the nursery and the number of people in worship. If you have those correct, everything else will follow. And so that's some of what around the centrality of worship.
I think we're doing pretty good in both counts at this point.
Well, mostly, yeah. Or worship attendance is just plummeting in the United States. It's following a European model and plummeting, and we're holding our own. Which against trend is great. Net is okay. Oh.
One of the things that fascinates me, and I'm sure some folks have the same fascination, that is the order of worship, because we realize it's not haphazard. And if you look at the Book of Order and the Directory of Ministry, it talks about the sources of our order of worship. It talks about Scripture. It talks about the Reformed tradition. And curiously, it talks about the context and culture of the particular worship community. Speak to that. if you
Right.
would.
Yeah, I think that's a very big issue, I think, for us and for every church, this notion of the forms of worship or styles of worship or how we design worship. So for forever and ever, there has been this balance or this spectrum of designing worship on theory versus praxis. And so there are these theories of worship that you're supposed to have this liturgical year and you make these observances and you do these things. And then there's the very practical side of things. For instance, Reformation Sunday. Okay. So who knows when Reformation Sunday is? Heather does. Who cares when
She's
Reformation
planning.
Sunday is? Does anybody here raise your hand? There might be one or two people who care. Don, you care when Reformation Sunday is. You do, Courtney. You might care a little bit. So we're running at about 5% or 10% of people care when Reformation Sunday is. It also happens to coincide most years with Halloween, which is a much bigger deal in people's lives. And so this theory, well, there is a Reformation Sunday, and on Reformation Sunday, we claim all the things that define our particular strand of faith. And so in that way, it's very, very important. It's also the idea of a Reformation Sunday is extremely remote to the person who's trying to get a 2 and 4-year-old to church that morning and looking for how to feel better about their parenting or how to, so there's this theory and this practice. How do you get the theory around Reformation Sunday, which is saved by grace, that it's that there's a separation, that faith informs politics, that instead of the other way around? How do you claim some of these sola scriptura or reformed and always reforming, these Reformation ideas, to a very pragmatic expression and faith? And so these are some of the design challenges we have in worship. And so let me give you a couple more little thoughts about that. So one of the key questions, I think, on design of worship is how do you know what the essentials of worship are? And how do you define the essentials of worship? So what's essential and what's accoutrement? What's core and what's secondary? What's eternal and what's temporal? And to stay on the essential side, and then to be flexible about the accoutrement side. So for instance, being saved by grace through faith is essential. Knowing the song Amazing Grace is not essential to our Reformed faith. And to understand the difference between those and to be able to tease those out, I think is very important. Just knowing that we're broken people and sinful people in need of redemption is essential. Knowing the hymn "Just As I Am" is not essential. And now it may be important, it may be valuable, maybe in a way of embodying that theological idea, but how you do that is a real challenge in these days, especially when it's so segmented. And so in the Presbyterian Church, we talk about traditioning the faith, passing down the faith. And for many of us, that has become this notion of, well, I want my kid to know Amazing Grace, and I want them to know Just As I Am, and I want them to know Here I Am. And but really what we want our children to know that we're made in the image of God, and that we're broken and saved by faith, and we're saved by grace, and we're given gifts and are called to be responsible stewards. Those are the theological ideas that have a different expression. And so we try to embody that across our worship life.
Yeah.
And that's not particularly easy for folks coming from a variety of traditions.
Yeah. Now, on this, across our worship life, under your leadership here, we've expanded. We have 4 services now. We have 4 this very day, I believe.
We do have 4, and a new member class and a Sunday school class. Yes.
Thanks for reminding me about that. But talk to this notion, this commitment to having 4 services and 4 options for members and families to be able to take advantage of worship.
Right. Well, first off, I admire the session for its decision making. This is a perfect example of worship being the centrality of worship.
Yeah.
And so there's a big investment. It takes more staff. It takes more janitors. It takes more music people, more preachers to be able to embody that theological belief that we believe in the centrality of worship. And so I'm very thankful that we have a congregation that reflects that core belief through our design and the allocation of our resources. So I'm grateful for that. I think it brings us breadth and health. Now, some of this is on just praxis. Okay, so how many of you were at the 8:45 service this morning? Okay, so some of you were there. Some of you were at the 8:45 service. If I were to ask you why you went to the 8:45, well, I have asked you why you go to the 8:45 service in the past, and the answers I get are this. One is it's more convenient. Okay. One is somebody called it the express service. It's shorter. That's not that wasn't my
Don didn't do that.
that wasn't my favorite answer, but it was an answer. And it's one but it reflects realities, right? It reflects the realities of somebody who has 2 children and works 60 hours and wants to worship and wants to anchor their faith. So that's another one. Another one is that I grew up in a small church and I want some intimacy and some community and people who know my name and I know their names.
Right.
And that's another answer I get about the 8:45 service. And so these are valuable dimensions. So I think this theory and practice, yes, centrality of worship, but also some people like a smaller worship setting. Some people want to worship, but have tons of demands on their time, and putting one early is really helpful. And so that's one reason we have these. Our 9:30 service we call contemporary service. Frankly, it's not very contemporary. Really the main difference is the instruments we choose and some of the songs that we choose. Other than that, same sermon, same prayers, and even the music isn't very contemporary. We don't have any fog machines. Minister doesn't wear skinny jeans. All those kind of things. But again, that is to reach a breadth and a style of people who come translating our theology, saved by grace, sola scriptura, all those essential theology into a different kind of format that is accessible and speaks the language of the people. What was one of the main reforming ideas that Luther and Calvin came up with? Is that faith is in the vernacular. It's in the language of the people. And so the contemporary effort, as well as the family service, is in the language of the people. That's based in our Reformed tradition, is that it's in the vernacular. And then, of course, we have the traditional service, which, by some arguments is traditional, is pretty traditional. I was looking back in some minutes of one of our predecessor churches, and back in the 1920s, there was an argument at the session of Second Presbyterian Church, the big church that merged into Covenant. And there was a resolution at session that the organist was not allowed to play more than 2 measures of interlude between verses. And they passed it on session. That was an argument on session years ago because they wanted to keep these traditions. But a tradition I'm sure you're glad we didn't keep is that John Calvin preached at least an hour. That was minimum. And an instrument was only allowed to play the melody line. That's it. And so some of these traditions change over time while keeping the theological content that defines who we are.
Yeah. You talked about you didn't use the word challenges, I will, but the staffing challenges with these 4 services. And I think you make a good point. It's not just the ministers in the pulpit.
Oh, no.
It's the choir and all the staffing needs.
And volunteer needs. I mean, yeah, communion. Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Don't steal Beth's thunder there.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
But it also creates opportunities, it seems to me, with our rich pastoral resident program and how we have opportunities for those folks to get into a pulpit.
Right. And I love that. And I love that the church has embraced that the 8:45 service is now primarily led by residents. I know it was again this morning, and almost always we have one of the residents in there preaching. And I love that for a number of reasons. One is the residents are sharp and they have a lot to offer, and they're theologically trained and sophisticated people, and they bring in new and fresh perspective. I think that's super. That's a rich service. I think it also cultivates them. It leans into this teaching church notion for a church like ours. Not every church can do that. Not every church can have residents. Not every church can have 4 services. And so because we can, lets us invest in the future of the church. I think that's really helpful and good. And I also think it gives an alternate voice. Um, I've been a member of a church. I've been in churches. Everybody has ministers who speak to them more or less, and so this gives access points and theological access points and personality access points for the congregation to be able to engage in worship in a meaningful way. So it's all a win as far as I'm concerned. It is stressful on music and on sacrament folks.
Yeah.
It makes it difficult for them.
All right. Well, I think we could listen to you much longer, but we've got to respect your time. Just one final thing. We're next going to be talking with Heather Potter. Talk to us, as you're the senior pastor here, the role of music in our worship and how important that is.
Well, I listen to music maybe 3 or 4 hours every day. And so music speaks to my spirit. It speaks to me of God. It speaks to me of faith. It bolsters my inner life. It's also a language of faith. It gives us a capacity to respond to God with whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. I think it's beautiful in that way. A friend of mine as a conductor at a symphony said there's really only 2 kinds of music. There's good music and there's bad music, and that's true across every platform. And one of the many things I enjoy and appreciate about Heather is she understands that and embraces that. So music is a gift. Music is expansive. It's a lure of the divine. It speaks to us in a way that other things cannot. And so primarily I think of music as a sacred gift that equips us to embrace the fullness of the spiritual life and to express, have a fuller expression of our faith. If you go into retirement centers, memory care centers, you can ask somebody, do you know your kid's name?
Yeah.
And they'll say no. And they'll say, but do you want to sing Amazing Grace with me? And they'll know every verse. And so music anchors faith within us in a way that really nothing else can and does. And therefore, I think it's a divine gift. So
I think all the things you were saying about worship confirms our statement against the long period.
very good. Very good. All right. Thank you for letting me be with you. Please excuse my quick transition. We'll introduce the A team now. I think Heather's coming up now. Is that right?
I agree with that.
We're glad. All right.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Appreciate it.
Heather, why don't you come on up? Are you comfortable here?
Sure.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I think you just got teed up pretty
I
nicely.
think I did. Thank you.
So Heather doesn't require an introduction, really. I'm going to do it very briefly. Heather Potter is I love this title, Director of Traditional Music. Gets right to it, doesn't it?
Mhm.
What does that mean? What do you do?
Well, it's a bigger bag to unpack than that one little label. So basically, I have oversight for all things musical within the context of the traditional worship services, which for our definitions are 8:45 chapel service and 11 o'clock sanctuary service. What that means in the details is management and oversight for any ensemble that might participate in those particular services, handbells, children's choir, youth choir, adult choir, maintenance of instruments, scheduling guest instrumentalists and guest soloists to participate within the context of worship, whether they're volunteer or brought in from outside of our community. And it also is the person who is the liaison with the ministerial staff in the preparation and planning of worship.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that, this concept of worship planning, because most of us don't have any concept,
Mhm.
nor should we necessarily,
Mhm.
about how that goes on. And in talking with you to prepare for this, I was astounded by the periods of time we were talking about, how soon you folks in your worship planning are talking about not just the scripture, but the music.
Mhm.
And you talked about the congregational music as well as the anthems
Mhm.
of the choir. So to kind of give us some idea when that starts.
Okay, well, on the day that Terry and I had our conversation about this morning, I had just inputted Christmas Eve. That was 2 days ago. So Christmas Eve is in our programming computer program and ready to go from a planning perspective. So what is that? 2.5 months? Something like that. So just to give you an idea of kind of what the timeline is. So how that works. About 2 to 3 months ahead of a season. I think in seasons, Bob thinks in seasons, so it makes it really nice to work together because we really do kind of look at long range planning the same way, which is so, so helpful. So he'll 2 to 3 months out, probably before that, will schedule out themes, concepts, ideas that are going to be the organizing structure of our worship on a particular morning. Sometimes that is down to the detail of what scripture it's going to be. Sometimes it stays in the thematic level and the scriptures get filled in as we get a little closer. And he'll give that to Shay and to me 2 to 3 months ahead of those services taking place. And so what I will do with those themes and topics is, first of all, I'll kick it to Kenny. Kenny Potter is my husband and also the choir director for the 11 o'clock
In that
choir.
order.
Say again?
In that order.
In that order. That's exactly right. That's right. And just say, be thinking on the topic of love, whatever it is, be thinking on this. And so he'll over here by himself be brainstorming out the anthems that he would like to approach with the choir. And then I go back to that list and start filling in hymns, brainstorming hymns, searching through page by page through the hymnal because you don't get it out of the index. Because sometimes the connection to the theme is in the third verse, it's not in the title. And so I'm reading through all of the text of the hymns, trying to find the hymns that are going to most support, I guess that's a good sentence, most support the direction that I think Bob might be going in. And that was important that I think Bob might be going in because sometimes we get to the last minute and I go, oh, I was wrong. That's not right. We got to change that. Or he changes it just enough that I'm like, oh, we've got the perfect hymn here. And we pull this and put that in. So it is very long range, but it also is sometimes you got to, call an audible and flip things just a little bit. So that's what I'm doing, planning service music, planning responses, that kind of thing. And then I go back to Kenny and say, what have you got? And I look at his list of choral anthems, and then I start sorting those anthems by the themes. And sometimes I say, you know what, let's hold that because something's coming down the line and that would be the perfect song for it. So trying to get everything in the right place so that it's so that we wrap the scripture and the theme and the main idea that the ministers really want to express and share. I want to wrap that in music so that you're hearing it in a couple of different ways and hopefully taking home that main kernel of truth that they have to share with us on that day. And so all of that takes place behind the scenes and down the line. And then the week of that worship service on a Monday, we meet together, music staff and ministerial staff, and we talk and communications for bulletin purposes. And we talk through bullet by bullet, everything that's going to happen in that service.
Heather, let's do this. Now, we have projected up here the
Mhm.
11 o'clock. So
Good.
coming up soon, the 11 o'clock bulletin, and maybe you could use this as can you see it?
No, but I
can't
have my
everybody
copy.
see it. Good, even better. So like to put meat on that, how
Yeah.
that comes about.
Absolutely. Okay. So you can see it. You're going to see that you're going to sing hymn 366, Love Divine, All Love's Excelling. Now I'm going to tell you, I've been waiting on this one for 2 months. We've been preaching on love for 2 months, and I knew we couldn't sing Love Divine every single week. So I had to put it in a place where I thought it might be best suited. And like I said, we chose some other things to go with different expansive love and generous love and gracious love and all the different ways that that's been unpacked. So we have Love Divine this morning. All right. And then the middle hymn right after the sermon is going to be the one that I can most closely tie. If there's some hymn that just really seems to mesh well with the message for that morning, that's the place I'm going to put that so that it kind of comes as a little package. All right. So this morning, the theme is, or the sermon title is Generous Love. And so I put God who's giving knows no ending. And so when you listen to that text this morning and you're singing those words, you're going to hear the generosity of God towards us, and then how we take that and are generous towards those around us. All right. And then our last hymn for the morning is Take My Life and Let It Be. Hopefully relatively familiar to the majority of you. It is hymn number 697 in the hymnal. But for some reason, I've printed the words. Now, why did I do that? Okay, there are a couple of reasons that I might print the words. One is because it's a hymn that I really want us to sing, and it's not in our hymnal. And so we print the text so that we're able to do some things beyond what we have in the hymnal. As long as you know the tune, we can kind of reason our way through it usually. Sometimes I print a hymn because I want to sing a text that you know, but I want to sing it with a tune that is different than the one in the hymnal. I do that for a couple of reasons. Sometimes I just think tunes set text in a better light and you grasp it a little better. And sometimes when you take a familiar hymn and change the tune, it causes you to read those words just a little bit differently, and you pay just a little more attention because you can't sing it right off the cuff. Got to pay attention to what's happening. So that's another reason that I might print the words in the bulletin or have them printed. This morning, it's because this is one of those that has 4 verses printed in the music staff and 2 verses printed down below the music staff, which number one is more verses than we need at that spot in the service most Sundays. And I wanted to pull, I don't remember, but I'm gonna make it up. 1, 2, 5, and 6. Well, that's a little harder to do. And so since it's relatively familiar, I had Rosie pull that text out and pull it in the bulletin so that you can see that one after the other, and you're not doing one of these kind of search and finds on the page. So that's the reason that those look like that. Other service pieces that you will see, you have the choral call to confession, Search Me, O God. Actually, the second verse out of a hymn whose name I can't even think of right this second, but the title was not what I wanted. What I wanted was this: Search me, O God, and know my heart. Think about why did I pick this? Think about what you know about what we're doing right now. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, O God, my mind and spirit try. So we have heart, mind, spirit. Those are your hints. Keep me from any path that gives you pain and lead me in the everlasting way. Body, mind, spirit, soul, all in. All right. So love God with your heart, mind, soul, and spirit. So that's why that's there.
That makes sense. So you talk about the congregational hymns, but we also know the choir's got to be prepared.
Right.
And so give us some idea. And you talked about your communication with Kenny, the director, and they start working on a piece of music, I assume, could be well in advance, right?
That's right. Depending on the difficulty of the song, depending on if it's something that they already know and we're pulling it back and refreshing it, or if it's brand new and a little more challenging, they'll start a month, 2 months, more than that in advance, preparing those anthems. So after Kenny and I have come up with a calendar, and he knows when I'm expecting songs to be sung, and I know what his schedule is, then I'll leave it to him, because that is his thing to do and he does it beautifully. So he will prepare the choir and make sure that they're ready with each anthem well in advance.
Good. Well, and we're sitting here, we're talking a lot about the 11 o'clock bulletin. We know that there is an active 9:30 service also. And we have Shay, the director of the contemporary team. Is there much collaboration between yourself and that team?
I love working with Shay. Shay and I have a really good collaborative relationship. We don't get to do things together in worship very often for obvious reasons, because we're doing, our schedule is different and our people are involved at different times. But anytime that we can, we overlap. And so sometimes I'll loan him singers to augment something he's doing. Sometimes he loans me players who come in to 11 o'clock. We do Bible school together every single year, and that's a lot of fun. We do some collaborative planning when the opportunity arises, or maybe it'll be, I need a song that goes like this. Oh, I have that one. I need a hymn that goes like this. Oh, I know what that is. So we do some of that kind of thing back and forth as well.
That's great. That's great. So I think it's great that there is that collaboration, because I think I can confess in this group and say that hasn't always been the case. So it's really good. It's a testament to both you and to Shay, I think. Before we wrap up, this is a question we hadn't discussed.
Okay.
So we're sitting here and we're fascinated to learn this music planning process. Tell us, is there a particular piece of music or a service that you're really, really looking forward to right now that you want to
That's a
tease us
good
with?
question. Piece of music or a service. I love planning the lessons and carol service. I really do because of the arc of the service. And it's the only one that I get that probably is the one where I um program more of the music than anything else. And I might go to Kenny and say, hey, I think this would fit really well. Would this be okay? And then he'll say, well, I want this one piece. And I'll go, okay, let's put it here and there and that kind of thing. I really enjoy planning that one. It's going
That's
to be
good.
fun this year. You
I
should be
think we
there.
always look forward to that anyway. So that's even more reason. Well, thank you very much. And Shay just walked into the room.
Yes,
I'm
he did.
embarrassing him now. I don't know how he finished up so early. You quit. Shay, Heather was just talking about the collaborative spirit that the two of you have and how you work together, sharing musicians and discussing music and that sort of thing. I assume you certainly agree with that.
So it makes it really easy. We don't get drawn into the worship wars that sometimes contemporary. So it really is a team effort, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to move on to talking about the other parts of the ministry, but does anyone have any, I think Heather, you need to leave, I think. Anyone have any questions for her? Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and the thought here. I think we're all know a little more about how music works here. I use the term haphazard in talking to Bob, but I think it's reassuring for all of us to know how much planning and thought goes into it. And we're very fortunate to have you, Kenny, Shay, and all the team. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you.
All right, now we're going to turn to the broader, you've heard about the sort of the worship planning and the music selection and so forth. But as I said before, it takes a village to make this happen. So first of all, I'm going to call up Beth Kuntz, who is our current chair of the worship ministry, one of the established ministries that works through session to make things happen. Beth, thanks for joining us and asking some folks to come and be with us. And let's go ahead and call those folks up. Carla Leaf, of course, everyone knows. Bill Keith, everyone knows, and Bill Cathy, who's joined us. Bill, like the other folks, had some responsibilities this morning at the 9:30. So did we get everyone ushered properly and the collection done? Good. That's good. That's good. Thanks for coming over and joining us. Let's start this way. Beth, why don't you sort of provide for us sort of an outline or provide an understanding of what the worship ministry is about and what you're charged and challenged to do?
So I'm not used to microphone, sorry. The worship ministry consists of the elders who are currently serving on session on worship ministry. They're usually 3 or 4 in a given year. And we, again, I think the theme today is just sort of the collaborative nature of all of this, and they call it corporate worship, what we do, and that's what it is. Serenity, we were talking about how one of the reasons I love the 8:45 service is because it's an opportunity to hear the interns. Serenity last year made the remark in a sermon that worship is not a spectator sport. And I thought that's certainly, it's true on so many levels. Probably Heather touched on this a little bit, the way we think about worship on the surface is sort of the calendar year, the liturgical seasons, sort of the 2 busy ones being the Advent stuff and then the Lent and Holy Week events. And, I can make a whole list, and we just had Ready, Set, Worship and World Communion Sunday, and then we have All Saints, and we're coming up on Advent and Christmas. And then, in the spring, we've got Lent and Holy Week and Easter. And then in addition to that, we have services that have special parts in them that require participation of members of session, current and former elders, things like communion. We have in the last 3 years had between 40 and 50, mid 40s to low 50 baptisms every year. And they're just lots of little organizational things that the staff hands over to us for that. And then there's confirmation of 8th graders, there's ordination of elders, and then there are the special services themselves. You know, we've been privileged to have 4 ordinations of ministers at services at Covenant in the last 4 years. And their weddings and funerals, Wednesday night services in some seasons, and then special services, which have been pulled together very thoughtfully and prayerfully by the staff, but also requires help from people like
Right.
Bill, from
Right.
the ushers, for the service of lament that we had this past year. There was a service after October 7th,
Exactly.
things like that. But I think the other way that I think about worship is, going back to Serenity saying it's not a spectator sport, is all the teams and opportunities for collaboration and friendship, and spiritual growth, because it's more than just pretty flowers. The reason that we do all these things. So there's, the music people, obviously, that Heather's talked about, and that's I don't know that she mentioned, I can't remember, the AV team. Yay,
Yeah.
team. Because, our worship spaces now include a virtual space, and that's something that Covenant had the resources and skill and people like Jason to get that up and running
Right.
in a hurry when the pandemic hit. And then, of course, we've got teams of ushers who not only support it's not just hospitality and safety for us, but I think that Bill would say that they're a team that supports each other, that it's a great group to work with. And same can be said for the communion, including extended communion and power up. There are lots of things that we really have lots of people sharing their gifts with. And then, of course, we have baptism coordinators, wedding coordinator. And then, of course, we have worship arts, and Carla's going to talk about that a little bit. And there's just a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. There are teams that get together to plan services like Maundy Thursday that involve people with a variety of gifts and talents. And then I guess I would be remiss too if I didn't mention the custodians. I think Bob mentioned them
Sure.
briefly, but none of this happens
Right.
without all these people who work weekends.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that overview, Beth. I think it helps us all to understand the scope. Let's talk specifically about a couple of these areas. Let's turn to Bill Keith. Bill, you recently assumed responsibility for coordinating our observance of communion here at Covenant. Was there a particular calling or reason that you elected to do that? It's a big task.
That's a great question. I thought about that, Terry, after we talked, and it goes back to when I was probably 8 years old. And I was in a small church, and in those small churches, communion was this mystical thing that you did quarterly. And you couldn't take communion until you had been through communicants class and joined the church at age 12 or 13. And so as an 8-year-old, I sat there and I watched these 2 elders. Probably they were my age now, but anyway, they seemed like really old men, and they would get up and they would take the cloth off the table that had covered the communion elements, and then these elders would serve. And I sat there and I said, I want some. And my mom said, you're not old enough, you can't have it. And so it became it was this fascination with me with communion. Fast forward to today, and serving communion for the first time in 2004 as an elder was so meaningful to me. And probably the most meaningful was on a mission trip when we had communion as we were closing the service, and it was face to face with people you'd spent the week with, and you could call them by name. And so communion has always been something that touches me. And so when Beth asked, would I do this? I was like, yeah, I think I can do that. And I think it's been okay for 3 months. We'll talk about this again in January and see how that is. But so that's kind of what started it. It's been a long time coming.
I think we all agree you're a perfect person to do it. So we know that session sets the dates of communion, and the ministers of Word and Sacrament administer or preside over communion. What does your group do to support that?
We actually make it happen.
So we're not going to rank them in importance here, okay?
Yeah, no. I'm a numbers person. So I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is how many times do we do communion a year, and how many people does that take? And on a Sunday morning, normal communion is 11 times per year. And I say 11 times per year, that's the sanctuary. Then you add to that Christmas Eve and Maundy Thursday. And so that's basically 13 times a year that we're serving in the sanctuary. On a normal Sunday, the sanctuary services take 24 people to serve and 2 to 3 people to prepare. And I have to thank the kitchen staff who orders the
Right.
juice and we bring the bread, but they order the juice and make sure that we have that on Sunday morning. But on a Christmas Eve service, we have 2 services at 3 and 5, and that takes 56 people to serve, which is a lot of hands
Yeah.
and a lot of coordination, which is why we'll talk about this again in January, see how that goes in December. But the importance of that is it offers intinction at 3 o'clock and seated communion at 5. And Terry, we talked about this, and I don't know if I'm going to talk about why do we do intinction versus
Please
seated.
do, yes.
And it's really about the numbers. We have 44 people to serve in the sanctuary on Christmas Eve, the seated service. It's the right thing to do. I was talking to someone about the intimacy of intinction because you're face to face with someone, and they said they like the service passing because they're sitting with their family and close friends, and they're sharing communion with the person beside them that they love, which I thought was a nice perspective. And so it helped me understand why we need both. We have 8 times in the chapel. We have 37 times in here
Mhm.
because we did communion and fellowship in the family service every Sunday because one of those objectives is to have children understand the elements of worship. And so they're doing communion every week. And we do Power Up, as Beth mentioned, for the elementary kids 7 times a year, and that also serves the sitters. And so all told, on a normal Sunday, on a last Sunday, World Communion Sunday, we had 32 plus servers and 3 people to help set up. So it's a lot of people.
There's a lot. There's a
Really,
lot.
really important work. And it's short-term commitment. Sorry, you're going to ask for volunteers, but we'll sell this. Short-term commitment as you can occasionally. It's not something that you're signing up to do. I'm going to set up communion every week. And it's a really easy thing to do. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Very good. Thank you for those thoughts. Let's turn to Carla. Carla Leaf has worn many hats here at Covenant, and I'm very excited about having this conversation with you now, Carla, because you're doing something a little different than maybe what you've done before, and it's this concept of worship arts. Okay, and I think as we go through, we're going to be seeing images of various the work of the ministry that you work with. But start off, Carl, if you would, by telling us what's the objective, what you folks try to accomplish with worship arts.
Have fun.
Have fun.
Yeah. I too get to work with Shay, and to work with Shay is just fun. I call him Jello because sometimes he's hard to catch, but other than that, it's just been an absolute delight. And for me personally, it came in a time where I was kind of lost after being here for felt like decades. And then all of a sudden it's like, now what do I do? And Bob asked me to work with Shay, and the 3 of us met, and I went through all the worship art closets and cleaned them out. And this idea emerged that we needed to come up with a library of art pieces, art ideas, ways to celebrate what is going on in worship. I heard a long time ago that, and I don't believe this statistic, but I heard it, that only 10% of the congregants are actually auditory. And there are so many other visual learners like kinetic and visual. And so for me, it obviously is visual. And so to have something that enhances what is going on in worship, I think is important for so many people. So we started building this library. Ron Boozer, who is just an incredible
Absolutely.
artist, did the banners that you see during Lent in the sanctuary. He has done the 2 behind me, and he hasn't done, but does the chalkboards over here. And I've had the privilege of working with Ron and was in here one Saturday it takes him hours to do these. And you can just tell it's a meditative experience for Ron to create these blackboards that we see. I think it's now once a month. For me, two of the things that have been most important, and I'm sitting here staring at one of the creators right now, we realized we needed to create more paraments, which are what we have on the colorful things that we have on the communion table. And I met with Carol Baxter, and first thing she said, "Oh, you need to pull in Emily Roniker." And I'm like, "Emily, she's an engineer. She's my daughter's boss. She sews." Well, yeah, she sews, and she has done two incredible sets of paraments. And I think the green set is up today, and just know that that is the creator of that. And we have, knows what a
Paraments,
parament is.
paraments, yes.
Parament are the
Thanks, Robin.
colorful, you could also call them communion tablecloths. We have had a set of purple, and I don't even know how old those were. She has created purple. She has created green. Barbara Nzizi is also setting greens, and we hope to create a library of whites and reds, which reflect greens and purples, which reflect the liturgical colors.
Carla, the table last Sunday for World Communion Sunday, and I think there's an image here, it'll float up. That's an example, right?
Well, no, that is World Communion.
Okay.
Typically, the person in the pink sweater comes in and does that, and that is one of her creations
There it
right
is,
there.
it is.
We have fabrics and cloths from all over the world, from the Holy Land to Africa, Turkey and Greece, and Robin does an incredible job setting that up every year. One of the things an idea that we're trying to embrace, number one, is to increase our library of paraments, and we're looking for people who love to sew. And then the other is working with Shay and Grace, because this is a worship space very soon. And it is for children, very young children. So one of the things that we are doing with another one of my favorite engineers, Pat Burgess, our two minds together are extremely dangerous. They are. So Pat has hand bent these arcs that you see that make these banners. This was his idea, almost barrel-like. And then I've been taking the children's art that we did last May and incorporating, you see flowers and hearts and fish. And then over here, much the same thing. But on this one, I encourage you to look at it closely. There are over 500 names from babies to 5th grade, not counting youth. 500 names that have some relationship with covenant, and they are written all over the tree. And I know Mary Claire has already found her kids on the tree. It's been kind of fun. And the last thing I want to talk about, speaking of the amazing Pat Burgess, is COVID hit in 2021. Thanks, Beth. And we were able to come in for that special time where you could come in and get your communion supplies, blah, blah, blah. And it was the first time many of us had seen the sanctuary in a year. And Beth and Dina Cooper and I met, and we needed hope. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were dying every day. So I found these lovely plastic butterflies on Amazon, and Beth kind of looked at them, and it was kind of like, she liked my idea, but she did not like the plastic. So she said, "Why don't we ask people to fold origami butterflies?" Well, me of little faith, I put 100 bags, 10 butterflies in each bag in the Welcome Center. 4 hours later, Kathy Pickard's calling saying they're gone. We need more bags. So my dining room became an assembly room. I didn't think we'd get 1,000. That's what I figured we would need. So at night, I was frantically folding those blasted butterflies, and we got 5,000 butterflies. Ron had done those beautiful banners, and the last one had butterflies floating. So I went to Pat Burgess and I said, Pat, I want the butterflies to swarm over the pews and go up in the air like that banner. Well, that was dangerous because multiple emails later, and I didn't understand one thing he was describing, he and Brent Tarleton came up with this fish line contraption that held all those butterflies. When the filming crew came in, they put fans under them. So they actually floated in that film, which was breathtaking. But the most significant moment for me was after watching scaffolding fly from one side of the sanctuary to the other. It was quiet. The communion table was filled with butterflies. There was a gorgeous flowered cross in the back. And I was standing next to Pat, and he might kill me for saying this, but he had tears coming down his cheeks. And he said, "This is such awe. This is such hope." And I think it was what we all needed. It was definitely a feeling of worship. And I think it created kind of a way for us to keep moving forward with bold ideas.
Carla, thanks for sharing that. I think most of us do remember that moment and that time and how important it was for all of our, I guess the word's recovery. And thanks for all that your group does to enhance our worship experience.
I just saw it in my notes. 20 seconds. One of the people who took butterflies was Alan Hickok, and Susan was 2 months from dying. And in those last 2 months, they folded the butterflies. And they wanted to have her funeral with all of the butterflies hanging. And we were able to line her family pews with baby butterflies. And I think it'll be something that they'll take away forever.
No doubt, no doubt. Bill, Kathy, let's talk with you. Your group, the ushers, I believe, play an indispensable role in making us have or getting folks in, out, collection, and all that. Tell me why you enjoy that so much. And I'm quite impressed by all of your name tags.
Credentials. I got
Yes.
credentials.
You're the most credentialed person here.
This is my more casual 930 name tag, Mr. Bill. And then I switched to the more formal Bill Kathy for 11. This one we can't talk about. And then, this one is coordinator for the day, which is a new layer of usher duty that we have added fairly recently with another rotation, another team. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then just your basic usher badge. And it just shows you anybody can be an usher. If I can, anybody can. We have a little over 80 active, currently serving ushers. And so if you went to every service on a Sunday for a whole month and then Wednesday nights, you might see 80 different people serving in volunteer position ushering. And our responsibilities or our goals are, number one, above all, is hospitality. We want to welcome everyone in with a warm smile. We want to help people get into the church carefully, and we just want to make it a real cozy situation so people really feel at home, so that visitors know where they're going. We help people find classrooms and the closest restroom, and we tell everybody where the exits are. So above all, it's about hospitality. And then second is the congregation's well-being. We know where all the fire extinguishers are, and we also know where all the exits are and where all the stairwells go. We know where the AEDs are in case someone were to have a cardiac event. We also keep up with what doctors, nurses or nurse practitioners or PAs are in the congregation on a given Sunday. We keep an eye out, who could help if somebody was struggling, or like the other week, if a little toddler goes down hard, who can help and who can look after this child and determine what's going on. And then our third responsibility, or the third thing we do, is worship assistance. Like, we're a subcommittee of the worship committee, and we're entitled the Worship Assistance Committee. And you could spell that both ways. We are, we assist with worship. We do all kinds of little jobs. We go get the bulletins from the receptionist's office, and we spread them out. And we make sure that we're covered on all the doors, so that no one has to struggle to find a bulletin or to find a door to come in and out. We make sure the candles are lit, and we make sure we keep them full of oil. We switched from wax candles years ago to oil-filled candles, and it saves a ton of money. And so every single Sunday, we refill the candles at the end of the services in the chapel and the sanctuary, so that next week they're ready to go. Or if there's a wedding or a funeral, it's ready to go. We also make sure the flowers are arranged properly or tastefully. And lots of times we have extra flowers left over from a wedding or a funeral, and we try to put those out in various areas, as well as the communion table flowers, just to make sure we, really honor the folks who donated to show those. We also,
You're making my head spin here. I'm an usher. My wife and I are ushers. I'm not sure we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing.
Great. We also, if you see us up in the balcony, or if you see us wandering around with a little blue form like this, and you're wondering, what's that weirdo doing? We're taking the count. Every single Sunday service, we get a count for several reasons. It's for the staff to know, how do they gauge themselves, and we also look at the trends in attendance, hot weather, rainy days, whatever, they're looking at that. Plus, we also, because the bulletins cost about 75 cents a piece or more for each one to produce, we try to guess, like Rosie Strong, if y'all know her, she is in charge. We let her know how many bulletins we are over and how many we are under each Sunday, so she can kind of try to target it and to keep costs under control. So like I said, if you see us with the blue form wandering around, we're trying to discreetly count everyone without disturbing their worship experience.
Bill, that's perfect. Thank you very much. I think we all feel a lot better knowing
Thank you.
what all you folks are trying to accomplish for us. Beth, these folks have acquitted themselves very well, I would say, and represented your ministry very well. Why don't you tie it up for us?
Well, I mean, I think that the thing that I would like to say is just, to quote Serenity again, that worship is not a spectator sport. And I think that's probably clear. There's so many opportunities for fellowship, friendship. I know Carla was talking about the finished product up there, but I have to say the process was what was at least as meaningful for me. Some people I knew well, some who I didn't, that we were all putting on masks and working on that. To share your gifts in worship. You don't necessarily have to be a talented musician. It doesn't necessarily have to be long-term. There are lots of shorter opportunities. Heather, for example, there's an opportunity to sing with the choir for just the Christmas season. You don't have to commit to the choir long-term. You can check it out. And there are just tons of projects with worship arts and things like that. And if you know anybody who has any questions about any of it, if they're not sure who to talk to, I can tell people who to talk to if they're interested in helping with that. If you're looking for a really short one and done thing, we are having a cleanup day in the chapel and sanctuary that's associated with CIC on Saturday, the 26th, because we all know that Covenant's mission and outreach and impact really starts in our worship services.
Right. Well, thanks all of you for what you do here. I've gotten a couple of looks from the corner back there. We are running a slight bit over, so we're going to conclude at this time. If you've got any specific questions for these folks, they're going to be here going out just as we all are. But thank you for your interest in the worship ministry and what we try to accomplish here. Let's close in prayer, please. Gracious and loving God, through our worship, we seek to glorify and honor you. This morning, we give thanks for the many gifts and talents that make it all possible here. Help us to clear our minds and open our hearts to feel, see, and hear the beauty of worship. Guide us now as we approach the following week. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks again, folks. Jason.